The following program is a podcast1.com production.
Your healthy radio addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
We have breaking news here in New York City. Police have evacuated the city's main bus terminal in Midtown Manhattan because of an explosion.
A source tells CBS News that so far it appears that a possible pipe bomb went off inside a subway tunnel just west of Times Square. Now, the source says that one person is under arrest and at least one other person has been injured. Another source says police are now looking at the possibility of an attempted suicide bombing.
Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham this morning on a big news day. The Roy Moore Senate race with Doug Jones in Alabama is heating up. Of course, that's going to happen tomorrow, reaching a fever pitch today. But first, this New York story, I've got to share this with you. We're getting many more details, and I've been on the phone since this went off. One person is in custody. He is a Brooklynite. He was either wearing, and this is where the information starts to break down, he was either wearing a pipe bomb or some other homemade explosive. It went off. It appears that this suspect is the only person injured. We don't know that for sure. I've seen other reports that suggest there might have been another individual injured, which is, a great blessing. It looked like this thing went off inadvertently. But he was in a passageway of a subway tunnel. And this explosive went off. Here's what I know so far and what I'm picking up from reports, calls to law enforcement, and et cetera. He's in his 20s, from Bangladesh. He's been here about 7 years. And it is worth recalling that ISIS did put out the call for an attack upon New York City. Now, I'm going back a few weeks because you'll remember they wanted something to happen during Thanksgiving. But now we're seeing another piece of what appears to be homegrown terror. This Bangladeshi who's in custody has been here for 7 years. We will no doubt learn much more about him. The governor, mayor of New York as well, is going to be briefing all of us shortly. But I'm just elated that A, he's in custody and alive so they can get intel from him, and B, relatively people are safe, though I think there's a sense of anxiety and alarm in New York, as you can imagine. It seems things are contained for the moment. The thing we need to be wary of is this a lone wolf? Is he acting alone, or is there more to come? Now, using that term lone wolf is always a little, you feel hesitant about using it, because the truth of the matter is there is this loose confederation of radicalized people that ISIS targets, recruits, and then sends out into the streets of the world. I mean, we've seen this in Barcelona, in London, in Paris. This is another bit of the reality that we're all having to live with. So we're going to continue to monitor this for you as we cover other breaking news, and a lot to get to. Pat Buchanan's going to be here. We're going to talk about both the Roy Moore case, the media falling down in some of its reportage about this Russian probe. Mike Farris will be here to talk about that Supreme Court case about the baker who refused to make a cake for a gay couple for their wedding, and they took him to court, and he pushed back. So where do the rights of couples begin to smack up against religious liberty rights, and which will prevail? We'll discuss that. A little later, Ralph Reed's going to be here because there's a lot of question. I've been reading papers all weekend. In fact, Pete Wehner wrote in the New York Times, why I can no longer call myself an evangelical Republican. And he basically says because of the president and because of people like Roy Moore, who are being accused of these horrible things that undermine and belie the faith that they profess, I can no longer consider myself an evangelical Republican. I'd love to know how my friends in Alabama, I know we have a lot of listeners in Alabama, and we will be taking your calls throughout the show. Because the truth of the matter is, though I see all these pundits, getting very dramatic on the weekend shows, and I'm just, everybody's got a point of view on this. the only point of view that really matters are the voters of Alabama. I lived in Birmingham for a number of years. These are not people who wait around for the elites to tell them what to do. These are independent-minded people with traditions and their own sense of values. And they are weighing, I know from talking to a lot of them, the charges against Roy Moore with the values that cohere with their own, the ones that he's espousing. And this is the heart of it seems to me, as I think through this. Are you willing to elect someone who will fight for the values and the issues that you believe to be important? Or do you vote for someone who in no way reflects your values, in fact, would vote in opposition to them, but has not been accused of anything? And personally, you might feel more comfortable with him, though he's never going to represent you or vote in the way you think issues should be decided in any way. That's the quandary that faces, I think, the people of Alabama, because on the paper, on the issues, Roy Moore coheres much more with the electorate there. It's a red state. And more than that, he's pro-life. He stood up for traditional marriage. He took a lot of hits over the Ten Commandments, putting them on the courthouse, front of the courthouses. All of that endears him to the Alabama voter. And I've said this 100 times. There's a great opening here, and if the Democratic Party has a moment of reflection, they might discover the opening that awaits them. We've seen it here in Louisiana. The governor of Louisiana is a pro-life, pro-gun Democrat, and he won against David Vitter, who was a very popular senator here, conservative senator. So there is a recipe to make this work, but the party has to be willing to tolerate, to be open to those who might depart from the democratic orthodoxy on issues like abortion or marriage or these social issues that have become dogmatic in a way that is injuring their prospects at the voting booth. So I want to hear from Alabama voters. 855-40-LAURA, 855-4028. I'm bungling this. 855-40-LAURA. So 40-LAURA. And I've got some sad news to report. Those of you who watch The Chew, those of you who have eaten at Mario Batali's restaurants in New York and L.A. and elsewhere, celebrity chef Mario Batali, you know him. He's kind of the heavyset guy with a red beard. He has been accused of sexual harassment by multiple women and is releasing a statement this morning. This from the Hollywood Reporter. This just in. I apologize to the people I've mistreated and hurt. Although the identities of most of the individuals mentioned in these stories, and they were reported apparently today, have not been revealed to me, much of the behavior described does in fact match up with ways I have acted. That behavior was wrong, and there are no excuses. I take full responsibility. I'm deeply sorry for any pain, humiliation, or discomfort I've caused my peers, employees, customers, friends, and family. Mario Batali, another well-known man, falling to the Me Too movement here. Your reaction to that as well. It appears as if, and again, the reportage on this is slight, what he actually did, but it looks like there was some inappropriate touching. And the question is how, in the restaurant industry, when you're passing through tight aisles and past counters and you're working in close proximity with people, particularly if you've got a line of chefs, I do worry that we're getting swept up in a moment and not giving people their proper due. But obviously, Mario Batali is admitting to doing something here. So the accusers were right. The question is, what effect does this have on the wider society? And does it have a chilling effect on business? We will take a quick break. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham, much more ahead. Sebastian Gorka as well will react to this terror in New York. Stay with us.
Thanks to my wonderful sponsors and your support, I'm glad to say that we can provide this podcast at no cost to you at all. As a loyal listener of my program, please consider testing our sponsors because they're the ones who actually cover the cost to produce this daily show. So if you're a dog lover like I am, how about giving your dog, your best friend, a fresh, healthy, and nutritious diet? When dogs eat well, they live longer and happier lives. I'm here to tell you about NomNomNow.com, which cooks the world's best dog food. It's made fresh in the USA and delivered right to your door every week. Nom Nom Now's customized recipes cook fresh in our kitchen, delivering healthy nutrition you can actually see. Switch to Nom Nom Now and your dog will have more energy, a shinier, softer coat, and a longer, better life. Nom Nom Now really is the best food for your best friend. And right now you can save 50% on your first 2 orders of fresh, healthy dog food when you use my code Laura at NomNomNow.com. That's code Laura and save 50% on your first 2 orders. NomNom now.com. And code word LAURA.
Raymond Arroyo back on the Laura Ingraham Show. I am delighted to be joined by Rob Schmidt. He is a Fox News reporter on the scene in New York as we watch the fallout from this explosion, maybe 2, near Port Authority in New York. Rob, give us the latest.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, we raced over there right when we heard it happen. This happened only about maybe 8 blocks away from our Fox News headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. So just to kind of paint a picture for you of the scene, this is 42nd, 43rd, and 8th Avenue, which is where the Port Authority, which is where all the buses come in. It's also an area where a lot of trains come in as well, and it's also where the 8th Avenue subway line runs right underneath 8th Avenue there. And it's just an area, probably one of the busiest, if not the busiest area of the city in the morning, because of the combination of subways and the Port Authority as well being there and all the buses coming in. So this is an area that, of course, if you wanted to inflict a lot of damage, around 7:30 in the morning when everybody's going to work, you would go right here. And it sounds like this was an ISIS-inspired Bangladeshi man is what I just saw the New York Post is now reporting at this point. 27 years old from Brooklyn, borough of New York City, and in custody now with injuries. It sounds like the device that he had was a pipe bomb. It sounds like it went off prematurely, and he wasn't able to inflict the amount of damage that he was probably looking to do, which is just a wonderful break for us, of course. And there may have been one other injury in this, other than the bomber himself. So it's a scary morning here as it's the 3rd attack on New York in the past year or so. We just had on Halloween, we had the guy run down the West Side Highway and right there on the bike path, and I think kill 8 people. And then last year we had the Chelsea bomber who set off that bomb in a dumpster and injured some people walking around in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. Yeah.
Rob, I'm hearing from the fire department, there's a report from the fire department that there are 4 people injured, but they are not life-threatening injuries. So that's, thank God, that this thing went off before the bomber intended. And it looks like the only person he truly hurt was himself, and, really only minor damage beyond that. What is the scene looking like there? It looks like law enforcement has basically locked down 8th Avenue, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of expanding. When I initially walked up, you could walk right over 42nd and 8th Street, and everybody was just responding and kind of getting a grasp of what had happened, and nobody really knew what was going on because it sounds like this explosion was relatively minor. But we had heard reports of explosion, and of course, when you hear that in New York, fire and NYPD come in gangbusters. And so you had all of these officers and SWAT teams and firemen all standing around kind of waiting to see what exactly they should do and where this actually happened, because it's a maze of systems underneath the ground here in New York. So it was hard to pin down exactly where this occurred. And then as it developed, by about 8 o'clock, 8:15, that intersection of 42nd and 8, which is a critical intersection in New York, 42nd is a major street, that had been shut down. And it slowly turned into just this expanding scene of, people were walking everywhere trying to get around it. And the subways that become very, they had shut down, I think the 8th Avenue line had shut down, and that just creates residual delays all over the city. And so it just becomes this mess of traffic, and the streets get busier because people can't get where they need to go on the subway. And so now you have New York kind of just a gridlock nightmare as they wait to clear this scene, hopefully not too much longer.
Well, I thank you so much for being there and for taking the time. Rob, please be safe and know that we're wishing New Yorkers safety, not only this holiday season, but, forever. I was a New Yorker for 9 years. I know, when something like this happens, it rattles nerves all over the boroughs and throughout the city. So take it easy,
yes.
and thank you for being there for us.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. We are going to take your calls, 855-40-LAURA, 855-40-LAURA. I want to, if we have it, James, that bite from Roy Moore. Roy Moore gave an interview over the weekend. He has been very low profile, and he sat with a local political reporter in Alabama, and I guess it came up. I watched the interview, these allegations against him, and he spoke very forthrightly and clearly about them.
I have written cards, graduation cards. I have known families. I've known a lot of people throughout my life, but these allegations are completely false. I did not date underage women. I did not molest anyone.
My audio dropped out on this end, but you heard what Roy Moore said. He did not molest anyone. He claims that though he signed a lot of cards, he was disputing that one of the claimants here, one of the allegations was that he signed this woman's yearbook and then, forced himself upon her and then kind of pushed her out of his car, she being 14 at the time. Now, the backlash, as you can imagine, has been intense. The president issued robocalls over the weekend for Roy Moore. Last week at a rally, he even told people, you got to go vote for Roy Moore. Where, I wonder, are the Alabama voters today? It appears from the polling they are back in the Roy Moore column, and they've factored in these allegations. I think it was something like 71% of them said that they don't believe the allegations that they're hearing. They believe they're politically inspired. Your reaction, 855-402-2872 is the number. We will take your calls. When we return, Pat Buchanan is going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about the Russian probe, this Roy Moore race, and much more. The economy, of course, soaring. Again, the stock market is exploding, and we're seeing unemployment the lowest it's been since early 2000. Not so bad. The president's numbers, of course, I saw a piece earlier today that voters are giving him credit for the economic boom. And I guess President Obama is trying to take credit for the economy. We'll get into all of that and much more with Pat Buchanan when the Laura Ingraham Show continues. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham. Stay right there.
They know I've stood for moral values, and so they're attacking me in that area. I understand that. But it's also part of a scheme of political parties today and political candidates in both parties, quite frankly, to degrade your opponent, to take him down so that you appear to go up. And that's just a simple political tactic. The preliminary information from police sources, and I emphasize your world, my former world, preliminary, subject to change. It is a man in his middle 20s probably, possibly from Bangladesh, been in the country about 7 years, who supposedly was setting the device off in the name of ISIS.
For ISIS. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham. That was Bill Bratton, the former New York Police Commissioner, and we are delighted to be joined on the line by Pat Buchanan, advisor to 3 presidents, conservative commentator, author, columnist. Thank you, Pat, for being here.
Delighted, Raymond. How are you?
Now, Pat, what do you make of it? Of course, Bill Bratton was there responding to the terror we're seeing unfold in New York. An explosive device went off. One person is in custody. It appears he's a Bangladeshi in his 20s, has been living in Brooklyn, and has been in the country for 7 years. What does this tell us about the threat we face from within, the radicalization that ISIS is capable of inciting, and what do you think this means to the president and his vision for creating a travel ban and protecting, or vetting, rather, extreme vetting, those who want access to the United States?
Well, clearly, I think it reinforces the arguments the president has been making that an awful lot of people have come into this country who haven't been properly vetted and are not friends of the United States and intend real harm, specifically the murder of innocent American citizens. Now, I don't know all the details of this, but apparently it was a pipe bomb, Raymond. And obviously it was set off to do maximum damage among civilians going to work. So I think this reinforces the president's case, I think, and it does say, and here's someone who's been here 7 years in Bangladesh, and I guess we don't know yet whether he came in radicalized or he became radicalized by something on the internet. But it makes the case for everything the president has been saying, that we really haven't been doing the job well, and that we have been diffident, and we have not been really focused as we should be on what's going on in the world and what's coming to America.
Mm-hmm. You know, Pat, this is it's shocking when this stuff happens and you see the anxiety that it is meant to create. But ISIS put a call out. They wanted a New York attack months ago, just before Thanksgiving, rather. They renewed their call for an attack. And we've seen a series of these. In Chelsea, there was the underwear bomber in Times Square that was foiled. So this is becoming a pattern. And there seems to be an unwillingness from some to see it that way. Pat, I want to move on to this Roy Moore race. I'm going to play a little bite. This is Roy Moore from an interview he did this weekend addressing these allegations that have sort of overshadowed this entire race. I'll play this for you and then get your reaction.
I have written cards, graduation cards. I have known families. I've known a lot of people throughout my life, but these allegations are completely false. I did not date underage women. I did not molest anyone.
Pat, your thoughts, is that enough? It looks like from the polling, he's going to beat Doug Jones by 49 to 45%.
Well, let me say on the Doug Jones thing, and frankly, in my view, and I've said so, that I would vote Republican in Alabama because Doug Jones would vote for against a Scalia justice or a Gorsuch justice. Mm-hmm. And the third branch of government is at stake, Raymond. And probably the overturning, or maybe the overturning of Roe v. Wade may be at stake. And I think I would vote for the individual who's going to probably put an end to this slaughter of the unborn. So that's why I would vote Republican here. Now, on the Roy Moore thing, I mean, I think what you have is enough, certainly enough in these accusations for people to conclude that he was indeed dating girls who were teenagers. I don't think they've got enough information here to conclude it beyond a reasonable doubt, especially when you see the forgery involved by one of these women who said he signed his yearbook. So right. This is basically my view, and my expectation would be that Roy Moore should win for the reason that, as was pointed out, I saw this morning, Barack Obama, who was a fairly strong Democratic candidate, never even got 40% in Alabama.
Mm-hmm. No, I think what you're seeing is the disconnect between those who are reporting the story and the Alabama voters, who take a very different view of this situation. And we're going to talk about this later. We're having Ralph Reed and some evangelical leaders on, because there does seem to be a struggle in the hearts and minds of these voters between the allegations they're hearing and the values that Roy Moore has long championed and that connect with the voters of Alabama.
Well, exactly, and this is exactly right. And you're really forced to make a choice here. If Roy Moore were running against a conservative Republican, now, again, in the primary, I don't know that he would win the primary there. But I do believe what you're looking at and what people see of the Democratic Party is basically hostile to all their views and values. They will vote that way in the Senate. They put at risk the Supreme Court and all these other policies. So that they simply are saying, as they did with Donald Trump, who faced similar allegations and things, I know he may have done some things wrong back there, but darned if I'm going to go out and vote for Hillary Clinton because of that.
Right.
I mean, I don't want Hillary Clinton in the White House, period. And Trump is saying a lot of things and doing a lot of things, flawed though he may be and have been, that I want to see in the White House. So I'm making this cold call.
We now see the drumbeat, and some of us were saying this when we first started hearing Al Franken and Conyers being thrown out of office without a hearing, really. Neither of these men were subjected to an ethics probe. Remember Bob Packwood, it took, I think it was 3 months, or 3 years rather, 3 years of inquiry. These guys didn't get 3 minutes of inquiry, and they were thrown out of the House and the Senate. Now we have a group of senators coming forward. In fact, there's a press conference today. Megyn Kelly is hosting some of these accusers of the president coming forward. And you already have congressional leaders saying we need a congressional inquiry into the president's behavior. Your thoughts on this and the politically...
Look, this issue was decided. The women were heard, their allegations or testimony in public on television, and the American people were given the choice. And they decided that if whether true or false or elaborated or exaggerated, that we believe that Donald Trump is preferable to be president of the United States to Hillary Clinton. And that's how we're going to vote, and that's what happened. So I think that the Senate, of course, in the partisan way, they may bring this up. Right. But I don't think you can take this as some kind of a step toward impeachment or something like that. This country, Raymond, is so politically divided, it is really balkanized. Right. In the sense that one side does not credit the accusations of another simply because they are made by the other.
Great observation, Pat. And the thing that plays into the hand of this, the president, of course, has been calling out what he calls fake news at the networks. And then you had CNN last week that reported what they called a bombshell, the smoking bomb, the smoking gun. And it was this email between Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks, which they misdated. They said it dropped on September 4th. It ended up dropping on September 14th after WikiLeaks had already made this stuff public. So it was a big egg on their face. I want to play David Frum's reaction to this news.
Excluding Fox, the worst mistakes that press organizations have made in the coverage of Trump has precisely occurred in their overzealous effort to be fair to the president.
Was that a case of them trying to be fair to the president, Pat Buchanan?
I think they were trying to be first.
Yeah, exactly. Strike the first blow. Go ahead.
Let me say, my friend E.J. Dionne has got a column this morning, and he's very grim and worried about what's coming. But I do think something is happening. Unlike Watergate, where there was a general perception, obviously, and a truth to it, that certain things were the stupidity of the break-in, and then there was a cover-up, and people had lied. Mm-hmm. What you've got here is, I think the two sides are so divided that whatever the Mueller and them come in with, if they try to impeach, people are going to see this as basically us against them. That's all it is. Their side is using this to take down our president. We're not going to let this happen. And you see a lot of Republicans going after Mueller, going after Comey, going after these individuals in the special prosecutor's office. Mm-hmm. So I think that the idea that it's going to be open and shut the way the Watergate thing was before the House Judiciary Committee, if we come to that, and we won't until 2019, I think there's going to be real resistance. It's going to be seen as this sort of one of these third world situations where our guys get control of the legislature and then we overthrow the government. So I think there's going to be a real battle beyond the legalities of it all and the facts of it all.
Pat, you have a column that I just read on Michael Flynn, of course, at the center of Mueller's probe and at the center of making a case that there was Russian collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. You believe that the contact that Flynn made with the Russian ambassador is entirely defensible. Why?
Well, here's what he did was, look, this was not an ordinary citizen. This was, you had the president-elect and you had the national security advisor designate. And Barack Obama makes this decision to throw 35 diplomats out of the country and shut down their country houses, throw them out of there. Mm-hmm. And so the president and Flynn, obviously, look, their hope for some kind of rapprochement with Russia would be severely damaged if Putin reacted naturally and threw out all these Americans. So they call the ambassador and tell him, cool your jets, don't overreact. We're going to be in office in 3 weeks, and we'll take a look at this. We'll take a look at the sanctions. We want talks. We want a fresh slate. It seemed to me that's exactly what Trump promised the American people he would do, and I don't have any problem at all with Flynn doing it. They should have notified the White House and said, look, we're going to do this because we disagree with your policy and we think you're sabotaging our policy. But the idea, why did Flynn not just tell the truth? Especially as an intelligence officer, he knew full well he was being taped.
That's amazing. Yep. No, it was, and where do you think this ends, Pat? I mean, the fact is he did go and cop a plea deal here. You don't give people a plea deal if there's nothing, if there's no information, if you don't have some smoking gun on the target of your investigation. So what do you think Flynn knows or did or is willing to admit to?
There's one point that's sort of limited here, which is, why didn't Flynn tell him about how they had all colluded with Russia? If Flynn and Trump had colluded with Russia and admitted it, and then the special prosecutor would have had the smoking gun and would have indicted him for it. Instead, he indicted Flynn for what? For lying. And he wasn't lying about, breaking into the email servers and the rest of it at the DNC and John Podesta. So the point here is, on the original cause of the investigation, did Trump and the folks collaborate in stealing these documents and giving them to the Russians and giving them to WikiLeaks? They got nothing. They're moving into these other areas and these other charges. Now, Flynn's got a lot of charges. The so-called Foreign Agents Registration Act, he didn't handle that. That's Mickey Mouse stuff. But I think it looks to me like they don't have the goods yet. I mean, if you're talking about convicting Trump in public opinion of doing what it was alleged they did, which was collude in the stealing of these documents and the publication of these documents.
Mm-hmm. Pat Buchanan, always insightful. Thank you so much for being here, and we will stay in touch. And Merry Christmas, Pat.
Same to you, my friend. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We have some breaking news for you. Mayor de Blasio in New York and the police commissioner revealing that this bombing suspect who did intend to create a terrorist attack, the bomb went off prematurely. His name is Ula Akayed, and he apparently was inspired by ISIS. They're not saying that yet, but from all the other reports, that's what we're seeing. We will have much more on this. Stay right there. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham. I'm on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo. She's at Ingraham Angle. We'll be right back. I don't know if you saw this or heard it, but you should. I posted it on my Twitter account at Raymond Arroyo. It is the choirs of Annapolis and West Point Academy. And they are singing in the snow, in their uniforms. There were not too many knees taken during this national anthem. This is before the Army-Navy game. Worth seeing. I saw it, and I have to tell you, it was revivifying after a rough week to watch this. Just in passing, I happened to catch it. Take a moment, go to my Twitter account and see that. It will lift your spirits, and it's postcard pretty. And to see these young people who've committed their lives to defending our country and our freedom, unified, both in song and in purpose, is something to behold. Also, I want to remind you, you've heard Laura talk about the work Food for the Poor is doing in places like Haiti and Puerto Rico. Do what you can this Christmas season. The people at Food for the Poor, they do incredible work. And Laura is looking for 10 of you, just 10 of you, to step up and give $2,500, which will provide food for 50 children for a whole year. Imagine $2,500 paying for food for an entire year for 50 children and water for the rest of their lives. Now, what we need you to do is 2 of you to give $25,000. One listener has already given, and we're looking for 2 more to step up and match that generous gift. In return, you'll get to co-host the last hour of the show with Laura, the last show of the year. Now, this is an organization that's really doing God's work. Give what you can this Christmas season. $250, $2,500, or $25,000, or really anything in between. Give now. Go to lifezet.com. Give to Food for the Poor. They are doing God's work. And if you saw the look on the faces of these children, some of whom are malnourished, they don't have water in their clean water in their areas. Food for the Poor is doing that. Lifezet.com or call 855-868-HOPE, 855-868-HOPE. And this is a time of year when we need to give hope and love and attention to those who might be forgotten. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. There's
Your Healthy Radio Addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
It's the wrong time and the wrong place. Though your face is charming, it's the wrong face.
Young's proof that she knew more, her yearbook with this inscription. But Moore and his supporters have called into question that inscription, noting the writing under the signature appears to be different. Nelson says she did make notes to the inscription, but the message was all Roy Moore.
Beverly, he signed your yearbook.
He did sign it.
And you made some notes underneath.
Yes.
It needs to be clear to the people of America, and especially the people of Alabama, that their stories are falling apart. That she told you one thing weeks ago, and now, 2 days ago, she's coming out with Gloria Allred and the Gloria Allred circus and saying, well, you know, Judge Moore didn't write all this. I'm sorry about that.
The wrong chips.
Well, the Roy Moore drama is playing out, and it will reach its crescendo tomorrow. That special election in Alabama happening tomorrow between Roy Moore and Doug Jones. I just read a Fox News story here. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham. Apparently, according to Fox News, the latest polling they have, or are citing, suggests that Doug Jones holds a 10-point lead over Moore ahead of the Alabama election. A Fox News poll finds. Wonder if that holds up. And did the announcement by Beverly Young Nelson, you heard it earlier there, that she had added to the inscription of Roy Moore, did that in any way tilt the belief or non-belief in her allegations? 855-40 is the number. We will take your calls. I know some of you are hanging on the line. By the way, Sebastian Gorka coming up. He will react to the terror attack in New York and what it should mean to us and what lessons we should glean from it, considering what we've seen happen around the world, in Barcelona, in Paris, in London, in New York, repeatedly. And could this be coming to other parts of the country? We'll get into that with him shortly. I want to go to the phones. Anne in New Jersey, you wanted to say what?
Hi, Ray.
Hi.
Hello?
I'm here. Go ahead, Anne.
Hello. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was on the air. I didn't hear the little click. Ray, you taught me a new word before, revivifying. I'm very happy about that. In any
so
case,
glad.
I have to respectfully I know, I love that word. It's awesome. I have to respectfully disagree with Pat Buchanan. I really, truly believe Roy Moore would have won the primary regardless because the voters believe in him. Just the same way Donald Trump was accused during the primary of false sexual misconduct accusations, he won. People believe in Roy Moore. They believe in his innocence. There is no hard evidence at all still to this day. And, you know, false accusations can take place. They have taken place. They've taken place against Clarence Thomas and many, many other conservatives. Ben Carson is one of many. And, you know, we have to, the presumption of innocence. I fought for Roy Moore, and I'm not even from Alabama. I'm from New Jersey. You know, I fought for his presumption of innocence and is innocent until proven guilty. And I'm sorry, but I'm disappointed with some of my fellow conservatives, you know, like Ben Shapiro. I hate to throw out names there because I'm not like that. But, you know, these people are on a rampage. You know, you know, they're on their Heil Moore ground. And although Ben Shapiro is an amazing conservative, you know, one of the conservative virtues is believing in someone, the presumption of innocence, and their right to be believed. And it's very disappointing that, you know, because this Senate race, Ray, if the liberals lose it, my God, they could lose the country for good. Okay, this Senate race is so important. So there's so many suspicious factors, you know, and then of course you have two words, Gloria, all red, right? And then of course now with this you know, inscription being debunked, you know, it's just amazing to me, right? It's just completely, it just continues to amaze me that,
Ann,
anybody can say anything about.
I thank you for the time and for taking the time to hang on and to call in, and most importantly, for revivifying my hope in our listeners. You have done that this morning. I think you make some wise points, and I want to hear from those of you in Alabama. I lived in Alabama for several years, worked out of there. The Alabama voters are immune, I think, to this kind of shakedown from the elites on the coast. They're not going to put a lot of heat in that. They make up their own minds. They're independent people. They're believing people, Bible-believing people in many cases, and those values trump just about anything else. And my sense is they are coming to their own. They factored this in. It's factored into their votes. 855-40, Laura, want to hear from you Alabama listeners. Go ahead, Mark in, I don't know where you're, Virginia. Go ahead, Mark. You wanted to say what?
I'd like to completely agree with your last caller, but I have a point about this poor Bangladeshi guy that tried to blow himself up. When these people get here, Bangladesh is a very, very poor country. And when they get here and there's no jobs to work, then they get disillusioned and start doing these wild things. Let's get this economy pumping so we can put these people that are here to work so we can help these people get along and achieve the American dream. And your last caller was spot on.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I do worry that we start to then believe that, and I think it's a misreading, Mark, to imagine that people commit acts of terror because they're economically impoverished. The fact is there are a lot of poor people in the world. My father came to this country and he was poor. He wasn't running around blowing people up or blowing himself up in a subway. There are other ways to register your displeasure with inability to get a job. And I think we have to be open, and we're going to get into this in moments with Sebastian Gorka, to the possibility that deeply held, distorted religious beliefs or understanding can lead to really bad ends. And there might be something in that radicalization that we must be on the lookout for. These aren't just average people from poor countries coming here. The fact is, look, I lived in Virginia, where you are, Mark, and there were poor people there who came from South and Central America. They're not blowing each other up. They're not getting on the metro in D.C. and blowing people up. There is a pattern here, and I think we have to look at that pattern, figure out what it is, try to stop it, and intercept it. But I believe that part of that, yes, there's a secular component, but there's also a religious component here that the United States and the citizenry, it seems to me, have missed for too long. And our lack of belief, the secularity of the culture, may be contributing to what we're seeing. We're going to get into all of that with Sebastian Gorka on the other end of this break. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham. We'll be right back.
There was an explosion. The police commissioner will go over the details. It was an effectively low-tech device. There were several injuries, we hope minor, and it was handled extraordinarily well. There was a disruption in train service and bus service while a sweep was being done.
That was New York officials briefing the press on this attempted terror attack today in a New York City subway near Port Authority. We are joined on the line by a man who has been following this for a long time, author of Defeating Jihad, former strategist to President Trump. Sebastian Gorka now joins us. Sebastian, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Give me your reaction to this. When you first heard this news, I mean, sadly, this is becoming routine, particularly in New York. We had the Chelsea, bombing. We had the underwear bomber. I mean, it seems to be increasing in frequency.
Well, look, the reality is that New York, after Washington, is perhaps one of the most attractive targets for terrorists, especially jihadis. They have also stated in their Al-Qaeda publications and the ISIS publications that they want their adherents to specifically attack the highest possible concentration of unarmed civilians. So the Port Authority is a perfect potential target. The good news is just as with, if you recall, the New York Times Square bomber, it looks as if this individual's tradecraft was seriously lacking, because it looks, based upon preliminary reports, that this was a premature detonation. He was heading towards the metro, probably wanted to detonate this inside a metro car to create the greatest damage possible, but the device detonated on the way there in a passageway, according to some video that's been released. So it's a classic jihadi type methodology, but thank the good Lord, the individual failed to execute it as he intended.
What do you make of this, Sebastian? We had a caller a little while ago, and I've heard this often, that it is people coming from countries like Bangladesh. They're looking for a better way of life. They don't have the economic sustenance that they need, and they act out in this way. I take the tack that this is a religiously motivated act at times, and that we're fools if we don't look at that and at least explore it.
Yeah, look, this is why I wrote my book, Defeating Jihad, to dismiss and jettison these ideas that 9/11 and that all of the jihadism that we've witnessed in the last 16 years is somehow the result of economic disenfranchisement. If that were the case, then, Raymond, half of China would be terrorists. Half of India would be terrorists. It's bogus. It's actually a cultural Marxist interpretation of the world, that everything has to be interpreted in terms of the tangible, of the material. No, these are individuals who are totalitarians, just like the fascists or the communists of yesteryear. These are individuals who believe in a totalitarian ideology. In this case, it is a religiously fueled one, and it is called jihadism. And they wish to kill New Yorkers. They wish to kill Americans because they see them as infidels. It's not about economics. It's not about disenfranchisement. It is about ideology.
And we're talking to Sebastian Gorka. Sebastian, how do you head off these attacks? I mean, it's got to be very difficult for New York law enforcement, national law enforcement, when you begin to see these people are being radicalized online, and then I guess they're going online to build their little, do-it-yourself bombs, and that's why they're setting themselves afire, and their underwear are exploding in cars because they don't know what they're doing.
Well, two things. Number one, we have to dispose with this idea of lone wolf terrorism. There is no such thing as lone wolf terrorism. It really is, a concept that was propagated by the Obama administration to make Americans disconnect the dots. The reality is that somewhere along the line, in most of the significant cases, whether it was the shoe bomber, whether it was 7/7 in London, whether it was 9/11, these are conspiracies. There is a broader conspiracy. There are individuals who recruit, who indoctrinate, who train. So what do we do? Two things. Number one, everybody has to be aware of their surroundings. To see something, say something isn't a bromide. It can save people's lives. Don't walk around staring at your phone all day. When I grew up in the UK in the 70s and 80s under the worst IRA attacks, everybody was aware of their surroundings. Always have a plan. Always have a plan. I train my children at an early age to think about what would you do right now in this locale, whether you're in the shopping mall or elsewhere, if there was a terrorist or just a shooter involved. Be prepared to get out of there, to escape. If you can't escape, to hide. And if you can't do either, be prepared to fight, whether it's with a fire extinguisher or with your bare hands. Have a plan of action. And then secondly, at the institutional level, it's about preventing terrorism. Good counterterrorism is preventative, not reactionary, and we need those human intelligence programs, those undercover programs that identify the terrorists before they build the bomb, before they rent the truck, the kinds of programs that unfortunately Mayor de Blasio has been trying to shut down in the NYPD. That's effective counterterrorism.
Sebastian Gorka, what else can we do and can law enforcement do to intercept or stop these recruiting efforts that are poisonously getting into the minds of these young men, and it's mostly men, here in the United States? This ISIS has a network. They light it up, and they're attempting to light it up all over the world.
I think we really have to follow the lead of what the president said. I think he tweeted it out after the recent attack in Egypt. So right now we've dismantled the physical caliphate of ISIS. With a new commander-in-chief, with the unleashing of our military. We've taken back Mosul, we've taken back Raqqa. But the president tweeted out that after the military successes, which is only a part of the formula, we have to attack the ideology. Just as Ronald Reagan delegitimized the Soviet Union, remember his tear down this wall speech, with our Muslim allies, with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, we have to delegitimize the message of jihad so that at the end of the day, people don't want to become terrorists. Killing terrorists is all well and good, but if they can constantly backfill and recruit, then we have to make the brand itself unattractive. So that's the next phase of this war.
And the travel ban, the fact that the High Court recently came down on the side of the president and his long-sought travel ban, what impact might that have in blocking and stopping these types of attacks?
It's absolutely crucial. I mean, we've seen it. We don't want to become the European continent. We've seen so many attacks, attack after attack in Europe as a result of flawed immigration policy. And we know that at least one of the Brussels attackers, for example, was traveling on a false Syrian passport and had acquired asylee or refugee status in the EU, and they used that to help prepare his deadly attack. So we need to make sure that everybody coming into this country is coming for the right reasons. We inherited, when we came into the White House on January the 20th, we inherited an utterly broken immigration system. Think about one thing, the recent New York attacker, the man who rode down that bicycle path with his pickup truck, that individual sponsored 23 people to come into the country after he came in. That's insanity, and that's why the president's moratorium is so very, very important.
Unbelievable. Sebastian, Gorka, thank you for being here, for your insight. Of course, your book, Defeating Jihad, available everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Raymond. God bless you and the listeners.
The Laura Ingraham Show continues in a moment. On the other side of this, we'll discuss that baker who's trying to take his case to the High Court to decide who he can and can't bake for. Stay right there. Oh, we have a little more time. I'm glad. We can go, I think we have a caller, right? We can go to a caller. On this Roy Moore case, we're getting lots of calls on the Moore story. And I have something to share with you, a robocall the president made over the weekend. We'll get to that later. We're also going to be talking about the tension some evangelicals are feeling because in their gut they want to support Roy Moore because he represents their values. He's long fought for the issues that they hold dear, and yet they may have moral misgivings given the charges. Now, these are unproven allegations, but nonetheless, in an atmosphere where an unproven allegation is enough to drive you from office, as we've seen with Al Franken and so many others, this becomes crucial. And it's up to the voters, basically, to process it and then make their decision. Now, you heard Pat Buchanan in the last hour say, well, with the president, that was factored in. The president had accusers, the voters listened, and they made a decision. But now you have Megyn Kelly and others bringing forth and resurrecting all those Trump accusations while Senate Democrats are calling for an investigation of the president's behavior and saying something must be done. Your thoughts? 855-40-LAURA will get.
Hi, this is Ben Domenech, the host of the Federalist Radio Hour. We're a daily show coming to you 5 days a week from Washington, D.C., where we interview our nation's top journalists, politicians, authors, chefs, economists, entertainers, and more. If you're looking for a contrarian discussion on news, politics, or culture, give us a listen and subscribe at podcastone.com, the new Podcast One app, or at Apple Podcasts.
Hi, this is President Donald Trump, and I need Alabama to go vote for Roy Moore. It is so important. I'm going to make America safer and stronger and better than ever before, but we need Roy voting for us. But if Alabama elects liberal Democrat Doug Jones, all of our progress will be stopped cold. We already know Democrat Doug Jones is a puppet of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and he will vote with the Washington liberals every single time.
That is a robocall President Trump sent out today. He recorded it over the weekend. I guess it was playing in a lot of phones in Alabama houses over the weekend and continuing today. We have so many callers from Alabama. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham. She will be on the Ingraham Angle tonight. She's away on assignment, but she'll have to tell you where she's been. Let's go to Matt, Alabama. You wanted to say what, Matt?
Well, first of all, I'm not even sure what an evangelical voter or Republican is anymore. I used to think they were someone that was, really reformed kind of, denomination. But actually, I know a lot of Catholics that I would consider maybe to be along that line. And I know a lot of Catholics voting for Roy Moore because he's pro-marriage and pro-life and all. I have to tell you, though, Trump, I agree with Trump. I haven't got the robocall, but I am all with Trump. I totally agree with Trump on what he's saying about this liberal left-wing senator, the guy that's running, Doug Jones, and Richard Shelby. In my mind, it will always be the Democrat that was elected to the United States Senate back in the 80s as a Democrat, and it switched over. So I don't care what the old senile Richard Shelby has to say.
Yeah, Richard Shelby is saying that he wouldn't vote for Roy Moore. Thank you for the call, Matt. Grace in Georgia, you wanted to weigh in on this Roy Moore case.
Yes. I was born and raised in Alabama, and if I was still in Alabama, I'd be voting for Roy Moore. I don't feel like they've presented any, black and white solid evidence against him, and all this just seems far too convenient, like a November surprise, if you will.
Yep. Well, there's a Biden alert that I just saw in Alabama. Apparently, former Vice President Joe Biden is swooping into the Alabama special election today via a robocall. He's putting out a robocall, of course, for Doug Jones, the Democrat running in the race. Now, there's a new Fox News poll, which is at odds with many of the other polls, that has Doug Jones up 10 points in Alabama. The Fox poll is alone in that. Other polls have him down by 4 or 5 points. We'll see how this shakes out. Luis in Alabama, you wanted to say what?
Yes, I'm a retired state employee. I lived in Montgomery and worked for 28 years. I saw the media circus around the Ten Commandments go on. Roy Moore, to me, loves to draw a crowd. Now, I know politicians like crowds, but he's something else. I will not be voting for Roy Moore, even though I am a Christian conservative Republican. I don't really know how we're going to continue to title people nowadays or name them as to what you are. You're just going to have to vote for how you feel. I will be writing in the name of our Governor, Kay Ivey, tomorrow, and I will not be voting for Roy Moore.
Well, we're going to get into this. Thank you for the call, Louise. We're going to get into this with Ralph Reed a little later on. The struggle that some evangelicals are having because they support Roy Moore's agenda. They like what he has said and represented for a long time. But these allegations have caused question marks to arise, and there is a real struggle as they go to the voting booth. We'll get into that. Mike in Alabama, you believe there's another source of difficulty here in the Roy Moore race. What is it?
I do. I believe that the Senate Leadership Fund is totally responsible for the mess that we have here in Alabama.
In what way?
They turned all their guns on Mo Brooks, who was a Freedom Coalition, kind of not a team player. They turned all their guns on him, got him out of the way, and then they figured that Luther Strange, who was the groomed team player candidate that they had picked for us. And so when he lost, then they come up with this fourth quarter, all these allegations to try to slam him. You know, people in Alabama don't like being controlled by somewhere else. You know, it's annoying
hit it on the
to
head.
me.
That's what, I've always said, and I lived in Alabama for a while, these are not people who like to be dictated to. Alabamans can think for themselves, and there's that independent streak in them, and they are also a believing community. The faith plays a huge role there, and they should have seen Luther Strange's demise coming a mile away. I mean, that was not going to work for the people of Alabama. So here we are. I think, Mike, you have it right. The senatorial leadership committee decided this was going to be their horse. They bet on him. Washington got on board, and there was one problem: the Alabama voters. Let's go to Jerry in Florida. You wanted to say what?
How you doing? First of all, to be straight, I'm a Fox News supporter. I'm a Laura supporter. I'm a Trump supporter. Mm-hmm. And I keep hearing this fallacy that Franken resigned. Okay. Franken did not resign. Not like, what's his name, Franks and Conyers. They out and out resigned. Franken left his foot in the door, and I'm going to bet anybody what's going to happen here. If Roy Moore is elected, Franken is going to turn around and say, if you're going to sit this guy on the Senate with his baggage, then you're going to accept my baggage, and I ain't going nowhere. And I would bet anybody that is the case.
Well, Jerry, we'll keep watching for that. You're right. All he said is he was going to be leaving at the end of the year. So he might be leaving a door open. We'll see what happens in the coming days. It is, I have to tell you, and a lot of people reacted to Newt Gingrich and Laura. They weren't defending Franken. They were simply saying it's wrong to drive men from office without a hearing when the allegations have not been fully vetted and cross-checked. That must be done. We live in the United States, and I worry as well when we have duly elected people just willy-nilly being dismissed from bodies of Congress. That's a challenge and a problem for the United States, and those voters in Minnesota should be mad as hell over it. I mean, maybe he did grope and made inappropriate comments, but I have to tell you, I've heard people come forward and say, "Oh, I was sexually, I was assaulted by Al Franken. He yelled at me, somewhere." Well, that's not. I don't know if that quite rises to the level of sexual assault. We have to be careful the terms we're throwing around as well. Thank you so much for the insight. We are going to come back in a moment. We're going to look at this case at the Supreme Court, where you have a baker who a gay couple came to him in 2012. They wanted a wedding cake, and he refused to bake it. He says that's his First Amendment right. It's his artistic expression, and he can decide when to deploy that. They say you're infringing on our rights as gay people and as citizens of the United States. Who might prevail here? The Supreme Court is wrestling with it. We will return in a moment and discuss it in full. Later, Ralph Reed, he'll weigh in on the moral dimension of the Roy Moore race. And be sure to tune into the Ingraham angle tonight. Laura will be doing a smackdown with Jorge Ramos. This will not want to be missed. Get your popcorn, kids. The Ingraham angle, 10 o'clock, Fox News tonight. We'll be right back.
If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake. Hired a band. Goodness sake!
What's your takeaway from these oral arguments today?
I think it went well, and I just hope now that the justices will look at this case and allow creative professionals like myself to create really according to their conscience, and that nobody else has to go through what my family and I have gone through for the last 5 years.
This case is not about a cake. It's not about a baker. It's not about artistic freedom. It's about us being able to be free to be treated equally in the public realm.
Those are the main litigants in a case before the Supreme Court. Jack Phillips, who is owner of the Masterpiece Cake Shop in Lakewood, Colorado. In 2012, two gay men, Charlie Craig and David Mullins, asked Phillips to create a wedding cake for them. He refused, and he did so on religious grounds. Now, he said, I'm willing to make anything else for you. You can buy anything in the shop. You're welcome to purchase anything, but I can't make a wedding cake for you. Joining us to discuss is Michael Farris. He's president and CEO and general counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom, and they are representing the baker Mr. Phillips, in this case before the Supreme Court. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond. Good to be with you.
Give me a sense of what's really at stake here. This has been portrayed as gay rights versus religious freedom. Is that really what it's about?
In an indirect fashion, yes, but mainly it's about free speech. It's about whether or not people who create art for a living can be forced to use their artistic talents for a purpose they simply don't agree with or don't believe in. And if the ACLU's position is adopted in this case, then the court could coerce all kinds of artists, portrait artists, others, to create things that they don't want to agree with, and it'll be the first time in our country that coerced speech has been ordered by the Supreme Court of the United States in an artistic context.
Mm-hmm. And where do you think this is going to end up? I mean, these two men say, wait a minute, you have a bake shop, I walk in, I want a cake. Shouldn't matter what kind of cake I want. I want a cake. The baker would say what, Jack Phillips?
Well, if it was already sitting there, he'd be glad to sell it to them. But for his wedding cakes, which are bought for their artistic qualities, they are several $100s each. They're creations of art. He does no wedding cakes except for custom cakes. And so it's a request to use his custom art-making skills. He takes a paintbrush and paints on the cakes. He sculpts. If this was made out of plaster, there'd be absolutely no doubt that it would be a work of art. And so it's a centerpiece of religious ceremony, and for the court to even be asked by the ACLU to force...
The cake is the centerpiece of religious ceremony? Of a religious ceremony?
A
cake?
Weddings are religious in character to most people in this country, including Jack Phillips, and he doesn't want to be forced to participate in what he believes to be a religious ceremony.
So at the heart of the argument is really, and I just want to make this clear to the viewer,
right,
Mike, the heart of the argument then is the artistic expression of this cake maker, of this artist, is being compelled, and that's really what's at stake. You have people mandating that an artist express himself whether he wishes to or not, even if it violates his religious beliefs.
Or any other beliefs. That's exactly right.
And you believe that'll prevail?
We're very hopeful that it will prevail. The oral arguments were very vigorous on both sides. The Chief Justice extended the arguments for about 40 minutes, which is, I've probably been to 50 Supreme Court arguments, and I've never seen that done before. And so it's a very important, it's going to be a very close case, but it was well argued on all sides, but I'm hopeful that we're going to prevail.
Now, we heard from Justice Kennedy, who really was at the center of the gay marriage decision. Give me a sense of what you heard from him in the oral arguments that might lead you to believe where his final vote could come down.
He read a passage from one of the commissioners, it was the Colorado Civil Rights Commission that made the decision, who
the gay couple went to complain about the cake not being made.
Right. And so it was a very anti-religious statement by this commissioner, and Justice Kennedy asked the Solicitor General of Colorado if anyone else on the commission had repudiated this, what he determined to be an unseemly statement. That may not be his exact words, but his words to that effect. And the Solicitor General hemmed and hawed and eventually said no. And then he asked him a series of questions, culminating in, do you repudiate this statement today? And finally, the Solicitor General of Colorado said yes, he repudiated it. And then Justice Kennedy said, tolerance is a two-way street, and I don't see the state of Colorado being very tolerant of Jack Phillips' religious views here. So that gives us a lot of reason for hope.
We will leave it there, Mike Farris. Thank you so much for the update, and we'll continue to monitor this case. It will no doubt be a major precedent and begin to define the limits and the extent of the gay marriage ruling we saw a year or so ago. Thank you so much, Mike Farris from Alliance Defending Freedom. And I want to call your attention to something. Laura is not here today, as you can guess. She will be on the Ingraham angle tonight. But I want to remind you of a crusade that Laura has launched in recent days, and it concerns the poor and people in places that don't have proper water, clean water. They don't have food. There's an organization that Laura's partnered with called Food for the Poor, and it has done incredible work, particularly in places like Haiti and Puerto Rico, still without power in some areas, the devastation after these hurricanes, and as someone who's lived through Katrina, I can tell you, it goes on for months, if not years afterward. But this year, Food for the Poor is doing some life-saving work, and you can be a part of it. We're looking for 10 of you, just 10 of our listeners, to step up and give $2,500, which will provide 50 children for a year food and water for the rest of their lives. That's probably the best $2,500 you'll spend all year. And I'm asking 2 of you to give $25,000. One listener's already given that much, and we're looking for 2 more to step up and match that generous gift. In return, you can co-host the last show of the year for an hour. So you'll join Laura to co-host, and then I won't have to come in. This organization is really doing God's work, Food for the Poor. Give what you can this Christmas season, whether it's $250, $2,500, or $25,000, or anything in between. Go to lifezet.com now, lifezet.com, or 855-868-HOPE. 855-868-HOPE. It's a great cause, Food for the Poor.
Thanks for listening to the Laura Ingraham Show podcast. Download new episodes every week at podcastone.com. That's podcastone.com.
Podcast One has new shows on our new app. Check out all the cool features to help you explore our exciting new programming, like America's Lakers podcast with Jay Moore, Sessions with Randy Jackson, So Random with Corinne Olympios, Attack Each Day, The Harbaugh's podcast, Not Just Sports with Susie Schuster and Rich Eisen, and Sound of Success, The Dick Enberg podcast, as well as your old favorites like The Lady Gang, Steve Austin, Shaquille O'Neal, and Adam Carolla. Get the new Podcast One app in the App Store, Google Play, or podcastone.com.